Hi, welcome to Pyrography Made Easy. I'm Brenda. In this tutorial episode, I'm going to explain how to create my Ornamental Glow Christmas Postcard artwork. Now before we get going, I do want to mention that if you're not familiar with the terminology that I use, I have a video that explains it. I'll put a link to that video in the description below. Well, let's get burning. Begin by embossing or engraving the hanging cords for the ornaments. I am using a standard card embossing tool, but anything with a small metal end on it will work. Next, switch to a writer pen tip and lightly burn in the trace lines. Keep the lines as light as possible in color. Notice how I use dots for the lines on the inside of the ornament. The dotted lines represent highlights. Also, I didn't burn in all of the transition lines along the right side of the ornament. I marked one with an arrow. These lines form the boundaries for the color that gets consecutively lighter. Or put another way, this area is going to be filled with gradient color. Afterwards, use a standard pencil eraser, I'm using a kneadable one, and rub over the burned lines to remove any residual graphite. Now switch to a shader pen tip, I'm using Colwood's Mini J shader, and burn in the upper left portion of the first ornament. Burn it to a medium to dark tan color. Make sure the color is at least as dark as your dotted lines are because you don't want the dots to show through. Now burn along the dotted line on the outer edge of the large reflection. Then start filling in the lower right side of the ornament. I am using uniform strokes to burn the area to a tan color. Again, if you are unfamiliar with my terminology, I have a video tutorial that explains it, and I will put a link in the description below. To soften the crisp edge that is starting to form along the dotted line, use circular motion and lightly burn over the line and fill in the first ring on the reflection. This will help break up the line and start the gradient shading for that large reflection. Reburn as needed to create a gradual transition from the dotted line to the first ring. Keep in mind that it is okay to use the burn stroke of your preference. I am using a combination of uniform strokes and circular motion. I like circular motion because it doesn't tend to form lines, and I can create very nice gradient color with it. Uniform strokes is my preference burn stroke to create really smooth, solid, or uniform sections of color. Work your way up the ornament, filling in the first ring with circular motion. Also, work on the area to the left of the large reflection, making sure to burn it dark enough to hide the dotted line. One other thing is to make sure to create gradient color as you transition from the dotted line to the first ring. Burn over the two small reflection areas near the bottom of the ornament. Make sure they are several shades lighter than the area around them. Rotate the board if needed to keep your pen tip in optimal position as you work along the edge of the ornament. I am predominantly using circular motion to burn in the ornament, but I do occasionally use some uniform strokes. Be aware that there is soft reflected light striking all around the ornament, so the edges are a touch lighter than the center of the ornament. You will notice that I fill the ornament with a base color and then reburn over areas to darken them up. Sometimes I have to reburn several times before the proper darkness level is achieved. Finish burning in or fine-tuning the ornament up to the first ring on the large reflection. Try to get the ornament smooth looking with gradient color that transitions along the line at the first ring. The wood that I am burning on isn't the best as it has a lot of vertical slivering on it. Slivering is what I call the thin, missing pieces of wood or the thin sunken lines that plywood has. This particular piece of plywood has a very pronounced slivering to it. This makes it a lot harder for me to create smooth gradient shading. Use a pencil eraser to remove the pencil lines along the inner edge of the first ring. I am using a kneadable eraser as I can keep a fine point on it, but any eraser will work for this. Now darken up the ornament between the prongs on the metal clasp. Then create a slight shadow just below the clasp and extend it downward towards the left just a little bit. Burn in the next ring on the large reflection. Make sure the color is slightly lighter than the first ring. Also, keep your transition from the first ring to this one smooth. You don't want any visible lines between the rings. The goal is to create gradient color that gets progressively lighter as we work our way to the center of the reflection. Use an eraser to remove the remaining pencil marks on the reflection. Then burn in the last ring on the ornament. Again, make this ring a little bit lighter than the one before it. Leave the very center of the reflection unburned. Take your time and reburn as needed to build up the color and smooth out the transitions between the rings. I pretty much reburned over the entire large reflection to smooth out the color. I am using circular motion for the reburning. As you can see, it takes a bit of time to build up the color and smooth out the transitions. Now it is a matter of fine-tuning your ornament. Critically look at the ornament and decide if it needs to be darker. Do your transitions need to be smoothed out? Is the center of the large reflection the lightest area on the ornament? Once you are happy with how your ornament looks, then burn in the other two ornaments using the same basic steps that we did with this one. I discovered that I am missing all of the video clips from the other two small ornaments being burned in, so I can't show them being created. But just apply the instructions for the first ornament to the second one and use my artwork as visual guides to help you along. Now let's work on the ornament hanger. Fill the top piece with uniform strokes that are tan in color. Reburn over the left half of the ornament hanger to increase the darkness level slightly. The goal is to have the left edge be a shade or two darker than the right edge and to have gradient color between the two edges. Next, burn in the small strip just below the top hanger. Make it a couple shades darker than the top. Rotate the board if needed to keep the pen tip in optimal position when burning along the bottom edge of the strip. Let's burn in the hangers on the small ornaments. Fill in the right side of the loop, then burn in the left. Darken the left edge of the right side a little bit more if needed for contrast. Then burn the rest of the hanger to a tan color and make the color get slightly darker the closer you get to the left edge of it. Repeat this same basic process on the other two ornaments. Be careful when burning around the hanging cord, or what we have as embossed lines. Start on the top portion of the large ornament by burning a dark line next to the rib on the right. Do the same thing for the other two ribs. Notice how I reburn a couple of times to build up the color. By burning lightly the first time, I can fix any mistakes much easier. After burning along the ribs, then burn a dark line under the thin strip above the ribs. Rotate the board so your pen tip is in optimal position and burn along the remaining edges next to the ribs. Then burn pull-away strokes on the edge next to the thin strip. Pull the stroke towards the center of the area. Afterwards, fill the remaining area to a uniform tan color. I am using uniform strokes for this process. Once the area has a base layer of color, then reburn along the upper edge using pull-away strokes. Again, start the stroke on the edge and pull it towards the center. You want the top and bottom of each segment to be darker than the center. I use pull-away strokes just for this reason, as they start darker than they end. This produces gradient color. How quickly the color fades depends on how fast you move your hand. Reburn as needed to build up the color. I did use some circular motion along the edge to really darken up that area. Now repeat the same steps with the other two segments. Burn along the edge with your pen tip in optimal position so the edges are crisp and clean. Then burn pull-away strokes along the lower edge of the segment. Start the stroke on the edge and pull it towards the center of the segment. Then fill the rest of the segment with uniform tan color. Afterwards, burn pull-away strokes along the upper edge of the segment. Again, start the stroke on the edge and pull it towards the center of the segment. Reburn as needed to darken up along the upper edge of each segment. Now let's fine-tune the segments. Reburn, if needed, to darken up the shadow along the right edge of each segment. Then evaluate your segments and decide if they need to be darker. I decided that the one on the right needed to be a little bit darker, so I reburned over it. Next, lightly burn over the ribs around the segments. Use the burn stroke of your preference for this. I am using an assortment of burn strokes, like circular motion and uniform strokes. The goal is to burn the area to a uniform light tan color, so use the method that works best for you to accomplish this. Then rotate the board and burn short pull-away strokes along the lower, well now it's the upper, edge on the ribs. Start the stroke on the edge and pull it downward. Stop the stroke a very short distance from the starting point. Now lightly reburn along the right edge of each rib. Afterwards, lightly reburn along the bottom of the ribs next to the end of each segment. This will make the ribs look a little more rounded. Switch to a writer pen tip and burn a light brown line between each knob on the next section of the ornament. Also, burn in the small dark dot to a medium brown color. I am using a micro writer pen tip for this step, but any writer pen tip will work. I want to point out that the line is thinner along the top of each knob and it gets thicker along the curve. Now keep in mind as you are working that you can burn the knobs in one at a time, or you can burn in all of the lines and then do the dark dots, or vice versa. It really doesn't matter the order that the steps are done, as long as both steps get done. Use a white charcoal pencil and color in the highlight or the bright reflection on each knob. Do not use a colored pencil for this. Colored pencils contain wax, which will melt and char under the heat of the pen tip. Now the charcoal does two things for us. First, it makes the highlight very visible, so it's easier to avoid it, because we do not want to burn on the highlight. Second, it will resist the heat of the pen tip, so if you accidentally do burn over it, it will help keep the wood as pale as possible. Start on the knob to the left of the transition knob and burn it in. The color should be darker at the top and get gradually lighter as you near the reflection, or the area that we covered with white charcoal. The transition knob I marked with a red arrow. It is the spot where the line direction changes. This means our shadow position changes on the knobs. Knobs to the left of the transition have shadows along their right edge. Knobs to the right of the transition have shadows along their left edge. I am using a combination of uniform strokes and circular motion to burn in the knobs. Burn in each knob individually. As you work your way to the left side of the ornament, pay attention to how the shadows change on the knobs. The highlight is moving upward a little bit on each knob, so at some point, the bottom of the knob becomes darker than the top. Continue to work your way towards the left side of the ornament, burning in each knob individually. Make sure to avoid burning over the white charcoal highlights. We want the highlights to be the palest spot on each knob. Remember to rotate the board as needed to keep your pen tip in optimal position when burning along the shadowed edge of the knobs. Be aware that some of the knobs have a really dark patch in their lower right corner. Now, rotate the board in the opposite direction and burn in the first knob to the right of the transition knob. Remember to shift the shadows to the left side of the knob. The transition knob doesn't have a shadow on it, so fill it with gradient color that gets lighter near the reflection spot. Burn in the remaining knobs individually. All of the remaining knobs are darker along their tops, as that is further away from the reflection. After the knobs are done, then use a standard pencil eraser and remove the white charcoal from the board. If needed, reburn the lines between the knobs to darken them up, and then burn a dark line under the long horizontal rib on the segment above the knobs. Next, rotate the board and burn a line next to the edge of each elongated knob. Then fill this ring with pull-away strokes. Start the stroke on the edge next to the elongated knob and pull the stroke downward. Stop before reaching the bottom edge of the ring. To get smooth results, slightly overlap your burn strokes. Also reburn as needed to build up the color. Continue to fill the ring with pull-away strokes. Pull-away strokes start darker than they end, so they create gradient color. Now I want to point out that the strokes are slightly longer where the elongated knobs dip or curve downward. The pull-away strokes are much shorter when starting them along the crest or the high point of a knob. Regardless of the stroke length, the pull-away strokes all end at the same general spot on the ring. That spot is a short distance from the edge that touches the small knobs that we just burned in. Rotate the board and burn really short pull-away strokes along the top edge of the ring. The goal is to make the ring look rounded. This is accomplished by burning dark edges on the ring that gradually fade in color. The contrast of dark edges with a pale center creates the illusion of roundness. Rotate the board and burn in the far left elongated knob. If you look, you can see that I didn't burn in the trace lines for the reflections on the elongated knobs. I also didn't use white charcoal to mark the brightest spot on the knobs. This is a way to try out different burning methods. The purpose is to help you discover what method works best for you. The elongated knobs have a transition knob just like the small ones did. Since we are burning the knobs to the left of the transition, the shadows are on the right edge of these knobs. Fill the knobs with gradient color that is darker along the right edge. Avoid burning over the reflection spots on the knobs. Yes, I forgot to trace in the reflection lines on the first couple of knobs, so later I have to fix that. Don't make the same mistake I did. Trace in those reflection lines and avoid burning over them. Burn in each knob individually. Begin by burning a line along the right edge of the knob to give it a clearly defined edge. Then burn pull-away strokes that start on the right edge. Pull the stroke towards the left edge. Reburn to darken up as needed. Also, slightly overlap your burn strokes to get smoother results. As you work, avoid burning over the reflections. Burn around the top reflection on these 3 elongated knobs marked with a red circle. The center oval in each reflection is the brightest spot, so leave it unburned. Use gradient color on the ring around the center reflection. I want to point out that the quality of the wood can influence your ability to produce gradient color. The board I am burning on in this video is very poor quality. It almost feels like I'm burning over a washboard. Plus it has a lot of slivering. Slivering is what I call the really thin pieces or slivers of missing wood. An arrow is marking a spot of slivering. Every single piece of plywood I have ever burned on has slivering. The only difference is that some boards are worse than others. This particular board I'm using is really bad. So between the poor quality and the slivering, I'm having a difficult time creating smooth gradient burn strokes. I mention this in case you are experiencing problems too. It might not be your technique, but instead a problem from using a poor quality board. As you burn in the elongated knobs, be aware that just because I didn't color over the highlights with a white charcoal pencil doesn't mean you can't. If the white charcoal is helpful, then by all means use it. If I can, I like to present you with different options or ways of doing things. Then it is up to you to see which method works best for you. Now that the shadowed edge of the knobs to the left of the transition are done, rotate the board and finish burning in the knobs. I am using uniform strokes and circular motion to do this. The uniform strokes I'm burning in the same direction as the wood grain, as that tends to produce slightly smoother results than burning across the grain. With plywood, the grain direction follows the direction as the slivering. My board has vertical slivering, so that's my grain direction. The vertical slivering is the reason that I am burning my uniform strokes in an up-down fashion. Again, I want to remind you that I forgot the triangular reflection on the first couple of knobs. I do fix that a little later on, and I'll show you what I did. Also, keep in mind that the background will be burned to a dark brown color, so make sure your ornament stays much lighter in color for contrast. You want the ornament to really pop from the background. As you watch this video, I hope that you notice I do a lot of reburning to build up the color. Pyrography is not a fast medium to work in. If I were to produce this same artwork using pencils, it would probably take me half the time it does to do it in pyrography, and maybe even less than that. So don't rush your pyrography artwork. Take your time. You're after quality, not quantity. As promised, here I am fixing my mistake. I am using the flat edge of an X-Acto knife to gently scrape away the char marks or the burn marks. I'm using very light pressure. I can't emphasize enough the need to use light pressure, especially on plywood. The reason is that plywood has that slivering texture, and it can be really easy to accidentally widen one or more of those slivers. Generally, I scrape away a larger area than I need and then reburn to get it down to the proper size. Rotate the board and burn in the elongated knob to the left or bottom of the transition on the screen. The shadows have shifted sides, so they are now along the right or upper side of the knob. Like before, I am using a combination of uniform strokes and circular motion to burn in the knob. I tend to use circular motion around the reflection areas and uniform strokes for the rest of the knob. Please keep in mind that there isn't a wrong or a right burn stroke to use for this step. If you have a burn stroke you prefer to use, then use it. For some reason, I was having problems with this knob. The burn strokes were blotchy and too dark. I don't know if it was a bad spot on the wood or what. Real soon, you will see in the video that the knob ends up looking a lot better. That is because I spent almost an hour using different X-Acto knives to gently scrape away the problem areas. It wasn't fun, but it does look a lot better after I was done. Our last elongated knob is the transition knob. With this one, I gave the knob a base layer of tan over its surface but avoided the reflections. Then I reburned over the knob to build up the color and added some shadows along the edges. The shadows, or darker shading, is needed along the edges to make the knob look rounded. As you work on this knob, make the shadows a bit darker along the right edge of the knob, as this side is further from the light source. I am still using the same two burn strokes that I have been using all along for this, and they are uniform strokes and circular motion. After the elongated knobs are done, look them over and decide if you need any fine-tuning. I looked at mine and decided that the darker shadow areas needed to be intensified, so I'm reburning to darken them up. With this last ring of knobs, start on the knobs to the left of the transition. The transition knob has a red circle around it. Begin each knob by burning a line along the right edge. Then fill the knob with pull-away strokes. Start the stroke on the line and pull it towards the left edge of the knob. These knobs should be darkest in the upper right-hand corner and get gradually lighter from there. Reburn as needed to darken up the knobs, especially the upper right corners. Make sure that the left and lower edge of each knob remains in the tan hue range for good contrast with both the background and the bottom of the ornament. With the transition knob, burn pull-away strokes along its right edge. Don't burn too darkly on this knob. Rotate the board and burn pull-away strokes along the remaining edge of the transition knob. Make sure to leave the lower edge fairly pale in color. Also, the center of the knob should be lighter than the edges to give it a rounded appearance. After the transition knob is done, burn in the remaining knobs on this ring. Begin by burning a line along the right edge and then fill the knob with pull-away strokes. Start the stroke on the line and pull it towards the left edge of the knob. Because the wood I'm burning on has such poor quality, I also had to use uniform strokes burned in the same direction as the grain line to get smoother looking color. With the bottom segment of the ornament, begin by burning a dark line just under the ring of knobs. After the line is burned in, then burn pull-away strokes along the line. Start the stroke on the line and pull it down a short distance. Make sure all of your burn strokes end near the same place. or the same distance from the starting point. Also, to get smoother results, it helps to overlap your strokes a little. Our goal is to create a highlight just under our pull-away strokes. Rotate the board and burn uniform strokes that start approximately 1/4 to 1/2 inch away, that would be 0.6 to 1.3 centimeters, from the curve where we're going to be creating that highlight. Pull the stroke down towards the curve. Get a base layer of uniform color and then reburn to darken up the center. I rotated the board for this for 2 reasons. One, you have more control when pulling the stroke downward towards you versus pushing it upward away from you. Secondly, the end of the burn stroke tends to be softer than where it starts, and I wanted the highlight to have soft edges. Now that the highlight has been created, rotate the board back and finish burning in the bottom of the ornament. Again, I am using uniform strokes to give the area a base color. Then I reburn to darken it up. Leave the edges of the ornament a shade or two lighter than the center to give it depth and a rounded appearance. To get the darker burn stroke like I'm currently producing, simply slow down how fast you're moving your hand. Or continue to reburn over the area until the desired darkness level is achieved. I often use a combination of both techniques when I'm working. With the ornaments done, let's take care of the background. Start by burning a dark line along the edge of the ornament. Work carefully and slowly. Extend the dark color a little ways from the ornament. What we are creating is a buffer zone. When the buffer zone is done, you can work faster because you don't have to get too close to the ornament. Plus, if desired, a larger shader pen tip can then be used. Use the flat of the shader when burning over the embossed lines. This ensures that the shader will glide over the embedded grooves so that the lines remain pale in color. Make sure to rotate the board as needed to keep the pen tip in optimal position when burning along the edges of the ornament. This will keep the edges nice, clean, and crisp. If needed, use a sharp knife tip to clean up any of the lines. The point of the X-Acto knife is small enough to reach down into the bottom of the grooves and remove any discoloration. It can take several passes with the knife to remove any char marks. Switch to a writer pen tip and burn in the opening on the small right ornament. Then fix any accidental scrape marks from the X-Acto knife. Now I'm going to demo for you why you must use white charcoal versus a white colored pencil. I colored in 3 circles on my test board. The first I used white charcoal, and the other 2 are different brands of colored pencil, Prismacolor and Soho. Then I burned over the circles with a hot pen tip. I tried to only burn over the white circle 1 time. Then I reburned around the circles to darken up the area and increase the contrast. Next, I touched the board to make sure it's properly cooled down so I won't melt the eraser. After the board is cool enough, I erased over the circles. The white charcoal erases cleanly, and the wood is a light to medium tan color. The Prismacolor colored pencil bonded to the wood and it discolored, looking a bit off-white. The same thing happened with the Soho colored pencil. Use a white charcoal pencil to color over several circles. Then use a shader pen tip of your choice to burn in the background to a dark brown color. Notice how I burn around the white circles. Then I quickly burn over the circles. Do not repeatedly burn over the circles, as they will darken up with each reburn. We want them to stay quite a bit lighter in color. The circles represent the soft glow of Christmas lights in the background. Keep in mind, you do not have to use charcoal. Instead, burn around the circle and then very lightly burn over it. Either method will work, and you can decide which one you prefer. To get smooth-looking results, I use uniform strokes. Also, I have the heat set on my burner just to the point where I get a darker burn result, but I still occasionally have to reburn in some areas. If your pen tip turns glowing red from heat in a short amount of time when you're not burning, the heat is set too high. Turn it down. The same if you see your pen tip glowing red before you go to use it, tap that pen tip on some scrap wood. It's got too much heat and it's going to give you gouge marks in the wood. That's it for this tutorial. I burned the design onto a piece of die-cut plywood that I bought at a craft store, and it took me 5.5 hours to do it. On my website, Pyrography Made Easy, I have the written version of the tutorial along with a free pattern that you can download. Well, thank you again for watching my video, and I will see you next week.